Hello, everyone. This is Tony Lawson, CEO and co-founder of Shop Black. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Jared Ball. Dr. Ball is a professor of communication studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. And he's also the author of The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. How are you doing today, Dr. Ball?
I am as good as could be expected. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you.
No problem. Well, thanks for joining. And we're about to get into some interesting subject matter here, controversial to some. I know there are a lot of people who are refreshed and happy to hear that I was going to be speaking with you. They've also read your book as well, and they're eager to hear what you have to say and eager for your message to reach a wider audience. So, with that being said, let's talk about the book and the myth and propaganda of Black buying power. What prompted you to write this book?
Well, first of all, again, I want to thank you for having me. I am familiar with the work that you and your colleagues have been doing, and I appreciate it. And so I'm happy to be, in this space. The reason I wrote the book is because just initially as an activist, and then later as an academic and a columnist, I had been confronted, as most of us have been, with the idea and the popularly promoted, as I'm calling it, myth, that Black people have 1.3 or 4 trillion at this point dollars that is just misspent. And if Black people were, quote unquote, more financially literate, then a lot of the inequality that we see existing could be overturned. But as I also studied economic data and some history and that concept didn't match. So just over time, I wanted to look into the origins of the concept and why it's been spread so far and throughout the entire Black political spectrum. And the book is a summary of about 10 years or so of that work and research and also monitoring of the journalism and media about the concept. So.
Sure. So where did the term or the concept of buying power originate from?
Well, the short answer is, and I break it up into two different key moments, but initially it was developed in the late 19th century and the early 20th century as a response by the government and the political elite to an increasing social unrest coming from working people in the country who were saying, okay, we've come through a reconstruction and post-Civil War. The country we're producing so much for so much product and wealth for the elite, and we're not getting any increase in that share.
Yeah.
So what the elite wanted to figure out, well, basically to use buying power and cost of living and other issues, other methods of survey, mm-hmm. to figure out how to set prices and wages to make sure that people were paid enough not to rebel, paid mm-hmm. enough to be happy enough to buy the products they were helping produce, and also not asking too many questions about where all the wealth was going. In the second part, after the Second World War, primarily, and this was the most complicated and controversial for me, at least part of the research, is that after the Second World War, starting with John H. Johnson, the idea was commercialized and weaponized for the Black commercial press as a way to attract white corporate ad revenue by saying Black people are not looking to rebel, Black people are not looking to cause trouble, Black people just want to be middle class and go shopping and now have, at the time, what was said, $15 billion to spend. And then so, therefore, nobody should be worried about advertising to them or having them, buy their products or live in their neighborhoods. And of course, what Johnson was really trying to do was say, white corporations who are spending what is by now today, almost, I think, $500 billion a year in ad revenue. He was saying, you can spend a whole bunch of that with me and other Black-owned commercial media because we have a Black community that, again, isn't trying to rebel or do anything with civil rights and just wants to, live a middle-class life and be good Americans, and will buy your products. And that's where, by today, fast forward by today, where a lot of the confusion still remains around what buying power means and what it can do.
Sure. And I know another origin, I guess the most recent origin of that term that's kind of like set it, on its own, on a course where it became very popular and widespread, is the Nielsen reports. And I think the Selig Institute as well.
Correct, yeah.
So I think that's where most people get it from nowadays and kind of run with that. But what's interesting to me is, I guess, the amount of, or the lack of research has gone into the actual origin of it. And the fact that when you mention the term buying power, like, to me, before I actually figured out, okay, there may not be $1 trillion, I always looked at it as buying potential, because I'm like, okay, if Black people are on the bottom of the economic totem pole, where is the actual power? And I initially thought, okay, it must be being spent on, frivolously, on whatever it is. But can you speak a little bit on the myth that it's been, I guess, the money's been pissed away on whatever?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would want to just say to the you that was then, and to those who may still feel that way, that the reason propaganda is in the title of the book is because that's really where my quote unquote expertise would be in as a professional academic over the years, increasingly so, studying the history of propaganda. Right. And what I want to just say is that, the conclusions we all reach are often the design of a well-intentioned and organized and funded and resourced mechanism or process of propaganda. So, that's why in the book I talk a little bit about the broader, the scope, particularly after the Second World War, of promoting these mythologies across the board to everybody. Right. And then the way it's taken hold and form within just targeted at Black people. But that was the way you were feeling, is the way we were encouraged all to feel, that poor people are poor because poor people make poor decisions with their poor money. And if poor people were more financially literate, and we hear, that's why these, elite companies fund financial literacy programs. If people learn how to save and invest and, start businesses, then of course they would do much better. But that's not why people are poor, Black or otherwise. Nobody is poor because they're financially illiterate. They're poor because of a process of an economic system that largely demands poverty. So that's one thing. So sorry for that digression, but I just wanted to point that out. Buying power as a phrase, as a phrase, the word power loses its popular understanding. Buying power as a concept is really only the ability of any group to spend its money on products it does not own. It's the power to enrich other people. It's the power to enhance the stock value or the sales of someone else. So that's what is meant by the phrase. It's not meant, do you have economic strength as in assets or wealth or whatever. And if people read the Nielsen and Selig reports, those reports actually admit that. But then the journalism about the reports, which the authors of the reports don't help, because in part the authors of the reports are the Black press themselves, because they work with the Nielsen, NNPA, the National Newspapers Publishers Association, the largest collective of Black publishers, and others. They all work with Nielsen to produce these studies because, again, they're trying to attract ad revenue. So in the reports themselves, they're saying, we're not measuring income or wealth. We're not measuring assets. We're not measuring the actual economic condition of anybody. So they admit that. But then when it gets reported to us and the consumers of Black media or any media,
Mhm.
It gets reported as, just as you were saying, as by people who have not read the reports, by people who really don't understand the concepts or the data that they're talking about.
Sure.
And it gets reported back to us as if we are all collectively ignorant. And that's why so many people, and then people pick up the headlines. A lot of activists and pundits pick up the headline of $1 trillion, and they run with that without really vetting what is being said in those reports. And in part, that's difficult because, by now the Selig reports, which everyone references, and that's the way the propaganda process works. Even Nielsen references the Selig Center reports for the claims of buying power. So all of these claims go back to literally one single source.
Yeah.
And then that source puts its report behind a $125 paywall, so most people don't read it, including the journalists that cover it. And then they just cover the headlines, they don't look at the method. And then I'll stop here, but they say in that report, we have no way of really assessing the buying power of Black America or anybody else. These are all quote unquote estimates and projections. They talk about a model that they use, which is different from the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Census Bureau, because those numbers and data actually reflect what's really happening.
Mhm.
And then the model that the Selig Center claims to have developed is never explained in its own work. So it's impossible without really doing the kind of work that I've done to really get to the bottom of what's happening. So that's why so many people end up being confused. And we shouldn't blame anybody for that, because that's the design of the process.
Right. And I think a lot of people who report it and quote the 1 point whatever billion spending power, a lot of it
Trillion.
is
Yeah.
trillions. Yeah, thank you. Trillion. A lot of it is, like you said, they're taking this information from a source that they are looking at as reputable. They're not trying to spread any misinformation.
Sure.
They're thinking that, okay, well, this is a reputable institution. They've done this research. Let me, go ahead and create a report or an article about this information here, right? It's funny though, like even the statement or I'm sure you've heard this, like the Black dollar spends 6 hours in the community before it leaves, or something like that. It spends only 6 hours before leaving, and everyone else, their money circulates much longer than the Black dollar does. No one has been able to locate any agencies or private research firms with any data that show how long money circulates within a community. And I think someone actually said that it's almost impossible to track that information. And the data first appeared in a book that was written in 1996. They tracked the author, and she quoted some economic development specialist, but there's no mention of this person in her book or even the study. And that's another one that's been going for since like 20 years now. Oh, the dollar spends only this amount of time before it leaves the Black community. And
longer than that. I think it's older than that. But the real point is that it doesn't matter where that claim comes from. The claim is demonstrably false by anybody who understands economics or the way wealth is created. Wealth is not created by poor people circulating money within poor communities. Wealth is created by investment in the global economy and then reinvestment back into pockets locally or domestically,
Sure.
with possibilities for return on investments and all this other kind of thing. So this idea that other communities, because they're always saying, Jews circulated 20 times and Asians 30 times. I mean, all of that stuff is silly, and none of that is how wealth is created. So even attempting to replicate that, wouldn't help anybody. So yeah, but you are right that this is another one of the associated claims that never gets vetted or studied or backed up by actual data.
So let's talk about, because you just mentioned the real ways in which wealth is created. And you mentioned that it has to be created on a global scale, and it can't be by circulating money in a community that doesn't have any money. So would you say that, and I know that, you have extensive study and you might consider yourself a Pan-Africanist, would you say so?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how would you say, like, if we're talking like global, creating wealth on a global scale, would you say, how would we include, because I'm from Nigeria originally, how would we include Africa in that? Because I'm all about bridging this gap between the diaspora and businesses going on there. businesses going on here and connecting entrepreneurs and, you know, making great things happen in that type of way. What are your thoughts on how that could work?
Well, I mean, the first thing, and look, and I've been, you know, this has come up in the interviews I've been doing since the book has come out, but one real important part about wealth creation that I don't talk about in the book at all, that is important in the context that you're talking about, well, it's important anywhere, but especially in this context, is military conquest, colonial domination. You know, you know, as you know, Frantz Fanon used to say that had that one line where he said something like colonialism is total domination and conquering of land, something like that. So we always end up leaving or are forced to leave that part out. And when we always end up comparing ourselves, in this case, to white America, or maybe in the Nigerian sense to the British or to some other European power, what we always forget is that their wealth starts with that, the military colonial conquest of really the entire planet. In this country, we could just say, you know, the so-called United States. The British, of course, had an empire that they used to say the sun never set upon because it covered the entire globe. And if we go back and look at their own you know, spokespeople and scholars, you know, I'm one of my favorite old examples is Tropical Dependency, where Lady Lugard, the wife of one of British colonial, you know, the Lugard people that your Nigerian people should know very well historically, helped set up the colonial apparatus. Her whole book was, the point was, all of our wealth is based on our conquering of our colonies. So they're essential. That's why she was saying it's a tropical dependency. She's saying we're in the land of the freezing cold in Europe, but we have a tropical dependency because that's where all of our wealth comes from. So, okay, so we have to at least mention that. But after that, you know, at least starting from where we are now, one thing that I've tried to point out a little bit in this book and just talking about it is that the real way wealth is created is through public policy. It's not created through businesses and shopping and consumption and whatever. It's through public policy, because it's policy that determines everything. Who can do what business, what tariffs, what trade agreements exist, where a business can put itself in terms of zoning regulations, all, you know, banking regulations, everything is set up in public policy. So so that's one thing. And when we end up having Black America being compared to other communities who are said to be doing better here than Black people in America, one of the main components that gets left out is the history of federal state policy agreements between their countries. Not just, you know, so the Chinese government had a relationship with the federal government here to allow Chinese businesses to be spread throughout the country. Other communities have greater access to you know, to loans through credit relationships that Black people don't have here. Other people come to this country with greater asset, you know, most so-called legal, actually the so-called average legal immigrant to this country comes here from an economic position stronger than most Black Americans. So they're already coming with a back. So there are a lot of, you know, so one thing that would be great, for instance, would be if, for instance, if Nigeria were able to develop a Pan-African relationship with Black America, a sort of unofficial, even citizen relationship, where Africans here, regardless of their actual colonial origin, so it would just, broadly speaking, Africans here could consider Nigeria a sort of state abroad. And that country could from there, not only do better for itself, perhaps. Obviously, Nigeria doesn't have full independence or sovereignty in the global economic order. Right. So I'm trying to cobble here quickly somewhat of a fantasy idea, but the idea would be that Nigeria could exert public policy influence or agreements with the United States government to say, look, we'll engage in some sort of trade agreement with some sort of product that we produce or have control over to your country in exchange for you developing some sort of policy that engages in support of whether through procurement, as was discussed in my book, government buying power being directed to specific businesses to support those businesses, or that these X amount of businesses be supported, or be Black businesses that are supported, that are engaging in this trade agreement relationship. Um, you know, that's the kind of,
Okay.
you know, idea that I think, you know, that would have to develop and evolve here, and that would be beautiful on a Pan-African, in a Pan-African way, because what has always been a problem for Africans in America struggling here has been trying to have allies from outside the United States to exert pressure, because ultimately that's how all progress is made.
Right.
So again, when people talk about Jews, there's a relationship with Israel as a state apparatus that helps exert pressure back, you know, going back and forth to make sure Jews here and there get certain, you know, protections, just in terms of taxes going to Israel, for instance, is a great boost. You know, it's the federal government that has agreements with, for instance, Israeli defense contractors and other Israeli manufacturing that props up and you know, supplements those businesses. The same kind of pressure needs to be exerted at a policy level to help Black businesses here and abroad if they're going to be helped. There's many more examples that I'm you know, it may be admittedly struggling to put together in this quick response to a question, but the real point that I'm getting at, and I talk about at the end of the book, is that the real way to develop economic strength is through capturing public policy. The elite have almost exclusive control over public policy in this country and really everywhere, which is why their businesses do well and their associated relationships do well, even to the detriment, in this country's case, of other white Americans. I mean, it's not like all white Americans are doing well. They're just doing well collectively relative to Black people and everybody else. But it's public policy that allows for Bill Gates or Steve Jobs before he passed, or Apple or Microsoft, to make it more plain, to have the for instance, economic influence over public policy through elections, or the ability to set up agreements with Chinese manufacturing to compete on a global, you know, or to use our tax dollars to advertise overseas. I mean, all of this is done through public policy, yet we're told exclusively almost to focus only on entrepreneurialism and supporting Black business as a way to economically overcome these inequalities. Meanwhile, they're redirecting public policy. And as we just saw with the COVID crisis, when they needed $5 trillion or so, they just wrote legislation and created it.
Right.
But when it comes to everybody else, they're always saying we can't afford healthcare and school and student loan, you know, forgiveness and all of that. So, but anyway, so it's all public policy, and whatever relationships we can develop to develop allies around the world, the better off all of us would be.
So speaking of the allies that might be here in the U.S., right? I spoke with MRSA a few weeks ago.
Baradaran, yes.
Yeah, and I asked her, for those who don't know, the author of The Color of Money, and I know your answer to this already. I asked her, does what comes first, political power or economic power? Like, which leads to the other? And you've already answered that. So,
but it is political power. We should just put the emphasis on it. And if we remember, by the way, that's what everybody used to, when the slogan got popular, Black Power, that's what they meant. That's what Stokely or Kwame Ture meant. That's what the Black Panther Party meant. That's what Malcolm X meant. That's what Dr. King, particularly at the end of his more increasingly radical life, meant. That's what everybody was clear on. And then Nixon started the process of trying to walk us back to where we are now.
So what are your thoughts on the best way to mobilize effectively in a political way right now? Because I know what your thoughts are on left versus right, blue versus red, and actually maybe you could even speak about that. What are your thoughts on Democrat versus Republican, and those being the only options that we're left with at this point?
They're a created, phony, false dichotomy meant to make us go nowhere. And that's, there's so much history to back that up that I don't want to take up the rest of our conversation with that. But I've been developing, the myth and propaganda of Black buying power was forcibly and intentionally short, to make focus on just this one argument and not to go into too many other things. One fantasy solution argument I would like to see explored more by me or anybody else, or if it's been explored, I'd like to learn more about it, would be, because I was thinking about this discussion today, and I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if Black entrepreneurs and business owners, in an attempt not only to magnify a Buy Black campaign, because I've often been accused of not supporting that because I'm critical of buying power, and that's not true. I support all of that. I'm just saying it's not the solution for the collective.
Sure.
So I was thinking, what if more, or along with an attempt to magnify a Buy Black ethic, where we support Black businesses and Black, that yes, it would be great if there was a redistributionist idea that could be developed, where the wealth that was created, what little it would be, could be redistributed as just a way of showing what could be done if it could be expanded. But politically, what if the goal was to develop, to use that collectivity to develop an independent Black political bloc? Not necessarily a party yet, although that would be great, but a bloc that would operate the way Malcolm X and others used to advocate we approach the use of the vote, which was not about, as he said, develop independent Black political blocs and parties, where out of that would come a Black set of specific agenda and platform items, whatever those would be, and a set of specific candidates that would be run from within this collective to whatever sets of offices people wanted to run for around the country. Because the idea has to be, we can't keep operating the way we've been operating within the Democratic Party, which is to sit quietly and then vote for whichever Democrat is told is left.
Right.
Because the policies, and they've already said, Biden has already said, the Democratic Party has already said, we're not doing anything. We're not changing anything. We're not stopping fracking. We're going to increase funding to the police. We're keeping the wars going. We're drone striking. All that stuff is going to keep going on. The police, all this stuff is going to keep going. Wall Street, you're going to get all your money. We're not supporting unions. We're not doing none of that stuff, because all we're running on is that we're not Trump. That's it. They've been very clear, and this is not me speculating. They're saying that almost on a daily basis. Kamala Harris is the same one that said, keep the prisoners in jail so we have free labor to fight the fires in California. Like, this is not change, okay? And they're saying that they're not change. They're just not Trump, right. Okay? So that's really been their approach to all of our issues. That's why Black Lives Matter and everything popped off under Obama. That's why, even a Black president wasn't changing anything. There was no wealth transfer to Black America. In fact, he gave the biggest wealth transfer to Wall Street the country's ever seen until this last COVID crisis transfer under Trump. So there's no, and that's why he stepped out there and told the basketball players to go back and play. And that's why he made sure the Democratic Party got rid of Bernie Sanders and got rid of Keith Ellison and brought in Tom Perez. Like, Obama's part of the machinery that keeps it not progressive operation. So what we need is, and because he didn't come from collective Black political struggle, he was imposed on us by the Democratic Party elite. So that would be my suggestion, would say, like, while we're all going, to shop Black and everyone else and supporting all of this, I would love to see a component of that also said, whether it's, 10 cents of every dollar is going to go so that we can promote this political thing. We're asking you to sign up so that we can have a Black independent something, and we're going to develop, we're going to have a national virtual town hall, and we're going to develop, a platform. So we're thinking about 2024, right. And we want to go into that saying, here are our candidates, here is our platform, and we're not going to vote for any of you who are not supporting these basic, and they don't have to be they could be things other communities would want to adopt. Sure. But we need we need to start entering the process, and then part of it could be and I just learned about a new argument in a book called Angrynomics that talks about, and I can't explain the details, I don't know them, but basically explains a plan that would be a tax-free way to redistribute in effect, redistribute 20% of the GDP every year back to whatever. And that's sort of the way I end my book, that with a vague sort of, we need to redistribute the gross domestic product that we help create every year,
Right.
which before the crisis was $20 trillion. And if we had as that on the platform that 1% of GDP, and so it doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur or just a consumer, all of that helps create the GDP. So it would be 1% every year goes directly to funding Black student loans and Black healthcare and Black businesses and whatever, or 1% of what is spent on advertising is freely given to Black businesses so they can advertise in the national media landscape when most can't afford to do that. Like, that's the kind of thing we need to start talking about, because we need to be thinking big right now and better, because they want us to go back to pre-COVID, and pre-COVID was a nightmare already. So this is a perfect time in this stage of the nightmare for us to be thinking, what is it that we really want to do here? What can we do? And then to start aggressively organizing around that in a little bit different way. And I think that that's one way to do it. Anyway, I think that's one way of doing it.
No, that sounds great. And like when you mentioned redistribution, would you consider that reparations or a form of it, or?
Well, again, this is where I also, lose a lot of cool points, because I think tactically, reparations is not viable. The idea that we would be able to get, first of all, reparations are deserved. That's not the question. It's the tactics to get it, because this would require public policy, and it would require, 2/3 of white America to sign off on a redistribution of trillions of dollars just to Black people. And, maybe I'm pessimistic, admittedly, looking at the landscape, there's not a lot of love for Black people in this world. There's not, we could barely get them to stop killing people in the streets, much less say we're going to redistribute trillions of dollars just to you. So that's why the book argues for the broader approach to the GDP, which I think ultimately would lead to even more. So if we just said, look, Black people clearly deserve reparations, but we also understand white people, Latinos, Asians, nobody collectively is really trying to advocate for that. A lot of, with all due respect, we could talk with you about that. A lot of continental Africans who have come more recently don't advocate it the way it's popularly discussed, because they wouldn't get a piece of that either. So instead of saying which group deserves it, doesn't deserve it, for instance, if you look at just the history of the white labor movement, you could argue that white laborers deserve reparations because they have also been exploited. Chinese and Asian and all other groups have been exploited for not the same way, but I'm not trying to, I'm just saying that's the way they're all thinking.
Right.
Nobody's thinking we're chilling here. They're saying we've all, so just tactically, that's why I'm saying if the approach is, look, we all contribute to the $20 trillion just by paying our bills, buying gum, getting gas, owning a restaurant, eating at that restaurant, all creates that money.
Sure.
So if we just redistribute it so that the 20 trillion just doesn't go to the top 1%, or 90% of it goes to the top 1%, then we would be able to do a lot of different things. And I think that if we got to the point where everybody's, student loans were cleared, everybody had full and real total health care, if everybody had a decent home, if everybody was guaranteed an income or a job, or all kinds of things that we could do, then we could start to get to the next level where if Black people are not suffering in the way Black people are materially right now, then the next level of all the other healing can start to be addressed, because obviously the spiritual and all the other immaterial wounds can't be healed by white America. And they certainly can't be healed by a one-time check. They can't be, and we're not going to be certainly turning over ownership of all the business and manufacturing so that more Black people are involved and can control the economy. They're not going to do that either. Right. So we might as well just say, it doesn't matter whether I'm buying the pizza or I own the pizzeria. Everybody should be benefiting more or less equally, and nobody should be suffering. And then I think once all that's taken care of, we can start asking, questions about maybe more specific reparative justice for African people in this country. But I think because I just feel like tactically it's unquestionable. If you really broke it down and people understood how the economy works and where all this money ends up, and then you just said, look, if we just sign some legislation and says that whether it's through taxation or whatever, that this wealth can't just be disappeared into the hands of the 1%. And, you know, we're not telling you to stop buying rims and hair and getting your, you know, nails done. We're not telling you to stop buying tennis shoes. Buy all the tennis shoes you can get your hands on, because that money you spend is going to make sure that everybody has health care and that you have a job and that I have a job and that maybe we can work less for more money. I mean, you know, we would have more people to hire maybe. And then, you know, instead of me teaching 4 classes, I could be paid twice when I'm being paid to teach 2. And someone else equally good and well-trained as me could teach the other 2 for that same way. All of these things are possible. It's just a matter of political will. And then we don't have to have arguments over, you know, being told that we're poor because I don't go enough to your store, or that we're poor because you don't save your money properly. You know, we don't have to do all of that anymore. And then we also don't have to go to anybody and say, what is ultimately the plan here, would you please be willing to give us some money? We don't have to do that anymore because everybody, it would be built in.
Right.
So anyway, that's the idea.
No, it makes sense.
You know.
It makes sense. And I wanted to quickly circle back before we wrap up. So I know people will say, okay, so there isn't this 1 point something trillion. What exactly are we making each year? Like, what do Black people make collectively? And I think in the book you said it was 800
and change, right? I forgot the exact number, but it was about 800 and some billion.
Right.
So it was like, how could we be spending 1.3 trillion and that
we're only making we're only making 800.
Yeah.
And I think the breakdown of that is in the book also. So it's basically how many Black people are there and the average, you know, amount each Black person makes each week or each year. And then the number comes up to less than a trillion.
Right.
So I think a lot of it, like, you know, like you mentioned, it's kind of common sense. I think that what helped fuel this is like a lot of feel good, you know, it's kind of like, oh, it sounds great that we have this type of power, because there aren't a lot of things for a lot of Black people to feel good about. So if there's this, you know, hey, I have this type of power, I'm taking this, you know, mantra and I'm running with it. So it makes me feel good about myself. But I think that we'd be doing ourselves a disservice if we don't operate on facts as opposed to, you know, emotion. So, okay, even if we're only making $1, okay, that's fine. We're making $1. Let's figure out how to move forward from there, as opposed to, you know, the fairy tale or the misinformation.
Listen, there's a lot that Black people here and all over the world can, you know, African descended people all over the world can be proud of and should be proud of. I mean, we could go on for hours literally talking about all that has been and continues to be contributed to the world. Right. We just don't need this kind of mythology, and it keeps leading us back to mistaken conclusions. And that's really the problem. So the real power we have is somewhat on display in the protests. The real power we have is somewhat on display in the brief acts of uprise that we've seen from athletes or entertainers or people in the street. You know, Chris Smalls, the Amazon employee, starting, you know, what that brother's doing to fight back against Amazon right now is really impressive. I mean, there's, you know, the some white radicals have started a People's Party to start a whole new political party because they see the same scam that I'm talking about for their community. You know, so they're trying to start a whole new party, and they maybe have the resources and the numbers to start it for real. But I think we should support that too. I mean, you know, so I mean that's where I think we find the real inspiration. I find it, you know, when I see. And as someone who used to at least be more involved in grassroots political activism, that's where the energy really is. And you can find all that you know, positive, supportive, you know, encouragement.
Yeah.
But here's just not this. This isn't it.
Okay.
This just isn't it.
Well, Dr. Ball, thank you so much for your time. You know, I appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us and dropping all the gems that you did. And hopefully you and I can get a chance to, you know, talk more about other topics and, you know, come up with some other solutions for what's going on out here.
Anytime, and I'd love to hear what the response is to this, and I'm happy to come back to talk more about that or anything else. And I appreciate what you and your crew are doing. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
All right, sir. You take it easy. Have a great day.
Likewise. You too. Peace.